Did you know that Shakespeare's birth date has been a topic of debate among literary scholars? There is even documentary proof that Shakespeare was baptized on 26th April 1564. Many scholars believe that, in keeping with the traditions of the time, he would have been baptized when he was 3 days old. This fact would mean that Shakespeare was probably born on April 23rd. However, as Shakespeare was born under the old Julian calendar, what was April 23rd during Shakespeare's life would actually be May 3rd according to today's Gregorian calendar. Now, on with the show. Welcome to another episode of The Writer's Preview. Today's guest is Conal Creedon. He is here to talk about two of his novels. The novels are Passion Play and Begotten Not Made. Hello, Conal. Welcome to The Writer's Preview.
Hello, and thank you very much for having me along today. I really appreciate it. Actually, before we start, I would just like to say that I have a number of Indian friends here, and we're all very aware of the current COVID crisis, that and basically you're in our thoughts, and very difficult times. Just so I'd mentioned that at the start. But anyway, it's lovely to be here.
Thank you for being on the show, and it's a privilege to have you here with us. And thank you for your concern regarding the current pandemic situation in India. Before we go on with the interview, can you tell us about yourself, particularly your writing journey? Starting from your first published work, Conal.
Well, I suppose realistically, I would never have seen myself as being a writer. I always assumed that writers were a breed apart, that there was something different, they were out there. And if anything, I would come from, I suppose, an oral tradition, because particularly in Ireland, and particularly in the household that I grew up, storytelling, and I'm not talking about big epic stories, but the ability to engage by telling a story was really a highly prized thing. We had a small shop, we had a little corner shop, and back then, I talk about, before television was prevalent and that kind of thing, people would gather in the shop, and anybody who could tell a story basically was of value. So I figure from a very young age I was aware that storytelling was important. My own journey to writing was, I just started writing without any real desire for publication. I was writing and writing and writing, and I'm not even too sure why. And in fact, I was writing longhand, and I used to give them to a small shop around the corner that would type them up. And I was telling them they were for somebody else, that it wasn't my writing. I was a bit embarrassed about it, right? And eventually they knew it was me, because the stuff I was writing was very local. And then I suppose I started sending out my stories for competitions, and they won a number of Irish competitions, and one for the BBC as well. It was shortlisted, and then it just so happened that before I knew it, I was writing full time. I had a book of short stories out. I started writing for radio, and then it just, since then I haven't stopped. And that was probably around 1986 or 87 or whatever. Would it be that? Yeah, well, I suppose I really officially started around 1991, right? So I've been writing full time since then, and I write all kinds of things. I write novels, short stories, a few stage plays. I've toured, abroad a lot of my shorts with my plays. I traveled to China a few times, and in New York they go on there every now and again, and I just love it. It's as I always say, it beats working for a living, you know, even though it's a tough way to make a living. But I love the process of writing. I think anybody who doesn't enjoy writing shouldn't write. For me, it's almost like an obsessive compulsive disorder. It's like I just want to write, and everything else gets in the way of it. And I'm sure people who are fishermen, or people who knit, or people who whatever, they have the same drive, that anytime they get a chance, they're out there with their fishing rod, or they're with, and same, anytime I get an opportunity, I'm in here, and it's where I'm happiest, you know, in my little room writing my stuff. Realistically, if the stuff is published or not is not in my mind when I'm writing, and I think maybe it's a self-preservation thing, but I always feel that what is published is basically a byproduct of what I've written. What I've written is the fun of the joy of writing. What is published is something else, and I have to remove myself from that a bit, because otherwise I think I get too self-conscious about why I'm actually doing the writing, you know. So that's it in a nutshell.
It was a really a fascinating aspect you just gave us, starting from your childhood, and you were saying that reading aloud was something that was imbibed in you even during your childhood. So were you witnessing these stories while they were being told? Were they made on the spot, or is there a tradition behind that, particularly with reference to Ireland?
Truthfully, there's a huge tradition of storytelling, but that's not the kind of storytelling. It's not the formal sense. It's the ability to spin a narrative. Like, so somebody who can, you know, by the very act of going downtown to post a letter, and when they come back, it becomes an epic, you know, like who they met, what happened, there was a duck in the river, and, you know, a car nearly killed someone. And it was that ability to tell a story that I found fascinating, that it's basically that the story, the narrative itself was secondary, really. That what was most important was the prime character. Like, if you had a really well-defined, and I'm talking about a person standing at my shop counter talking, if this person was plausible, really, well, then the story would be good. And it didn't matter what he was doing or what she was doing. It didn't matter how small or insignificant. If you have, and I always say that fiction is all about stretching basically a lie, or stretching credibility to the point of, I suppose, plausibility, because once it becomes implausible, you've lost the audience. In other words, you know, if I was to say to you that I saw a fellow cycling a bicycle down my street doing 98 miles an hour, you would almost believe it, because 98 is so specific. Whereas if I say he was doing 100 miles an hour, you would dismiss it. So it's about it being plausible, and about, I suppose, bringing an audience into your story. So I don't come from the official storytelling background. That's a huge background here. They're called Shanachie. It sort of means an old, wise person who tells stories. That's a huge tradition here. But what I've been talking about is the ability to tell a story spontaneously. Yeah. And that's why.
So, fascinating as it was also something different to know that even normal everyday conversations can turn into an interesting narrative, like visiting the mailbox to send a letter, and then coming back and starting a conversation, and which then leads into a narrative. You talked about traveling to China and the United States, but I sense that most of your novels are mostly dealing with the local things, particularly the Irish landscape. So was there anything that was different about your travels that made you think from a different perspective when it comes to writing fiction, Conal?
Well, here's the thing, right? Almost every single thing, like I make films as well, I make documentaries, but every single thing I do is basically set more or less outside my house, on my street, you know, with a bit of leverage either way, right? So, like, very much about my neighborhood. And what amazed me, particularly when you travel, the fact that it's parochial here that for me to write something about my little area is very parochial in a way, right? It's about the traditions, it's about the way we speak, it's about the way we engage. But when you go to a country, for example, like China, and you present your parochial story, it doesn't seem as parochial, because it just seems like, oh, that is a story from over there. And that was significant, that the parochial is just as valid, like on a big platform. You might find that maybe in Ireland, parochial, I suppose the level of detail of introspection on what is happening in Ireland might make some stuff sound a bit parochial, but when you bring it to a larger stage like New York, it doesn't matter whether it's Cork, Kerry, Dublin, Waterford, Athlone or Ballymegash. It's all Irish, basically. And that in a way, that sort of convinced me that what I was doing was okay, because that's what I want to do. I want to write about what I know and my place, and that's very important to me, you know.
So your travels gave you an idea about the universality of storytelling, and what you thought as colloquial was actually applicable even in China, where people are able to relate to your story.
Probably more so, because they'd have less filters against it being parochial. They would just see it as being an Irish story, and yeah. Intriguing.
Now that we have talked about your writing journey and what are the factors that inspired you to become a writer, you are talking about the process of writing and how you fell in love with the activity of writing. But you created a separation between your published work and, shall we say, your final manuscript. What difference do you see in both these types of writing? I mean, do you find a separation between them, the final finished product and the unpublished manuscript?
Well, it's while I'm writing, if I start thinking about what an audience or what a reader might want, it really you start filtering what you're doing. Whereas, in fact, I know this might sound a bit sort of, but the truth is, what brings me in here to write is to find out what's happening next. Like, I don't have a flow chart saying, well, character one does this, character two does that. I go to bed and I wake up and I come in and I actually want to find out what's going to happen next. And this happens, it's sort of a process of thought. And because I don't really work to a plan, and the story sort of tells itself. Once the story is finished, once I get to the end and then it's been, revised and edited and all that, at that point, then I'm finished with it, and I go on to the next one. But I can spend a long time. Like, so I spent, I've been writing Begotten Not Made since 1999, a long, long time. I go into it, come away from it, go back to it. And, so they're two totally different things. The finished product is the end of the affair, really. The affair is what I'm doing with my keyboard and on my screen.
So the finished product is something that is even mildly different from after you finish writing the last sentence on the manuscript. Do you feel that the final published work has many of the things removed or filtered, and as a result is not indicative of your final output then, Conal?
No, not really, because I'm in the process. I'm the person who drives the process of taking stuff out. In fact, that's part of what I'm doing. It's like that self-editing thing that comes in. It comes in very naturally, because there comes a point where you have all this stuff and you try to fit it all together to get it from the page to the publication, right? So that self-editing or that putting together is another process that's slightly different. But yeah, it's different to writing, but it sort of isn't too, right? At that point, it's where you have stuff and you're trying to trim it down to make a logic of it all, right? Because often there may not be full logic from the beginning to end, and you just, you have to manufacture it. And at the end of the day, at the very end of the day, the whole process is storytelling. So there has to be, it has to carry through, from A, B, C. So, and that's done by that process of editing together the strands of, I suppose, mind, thought, and yeah.
So you become your own editor and you self-edit the material before submitting it for the final process of publication.
Absolutely.
I recently came across a question on Facebook. This was actually a Facebook post about a female writer, and she was saying that she finished her recent novel and she is looking to land a publishing deal. And she used a curious word there. She wants to try the traditional method first before going another route, but she didn't mention that another route. Do you think it is difficult to land a publishing deal for a new writer now, particularly for a fiction writer, Conal?
Well, see, I tell you the truth, I have published with 2 publishers, 3 publishers so far, right? And in 2007, and what she meant was the alternative is to set up your own publishing company, right? And I decided to do that, to set up my own. So I actually got back the rights of my previous books. So I had them published by Collins Press, Poolbeg, and an Italian publisher. And I must say, I really enjoy the whole process of publishing because, so for example, in this book, for example, right, the font is our own font. It looks like any other font in any book in the world, right? But it's specially designed for this book by a friend of mine, and it's the cover. Totally engaged with John Foley of Byte Design, another friend of mine, and Lisa, who designed it and put together from page 1 to page whatever, right? And it always reminds me of football, and I think it was Brazil came up with this concept of total football back in the 1970s, and for me, I like that sense of total publication, of writing, being involved with designers, being involved with the layout, and also it comes with, I suppose, where I am in that punk rock was a big movement here in the late 70s, where a lot of bands were bringing out their own records, and I even notice now that like a lot of my favorite musicians, people like Claire Sands, people like John Spillane, people like Joe Wolf, they're all bringing out their own albums on their own labels. It seems to be that technology has moved that way, right? And speaking of punk rock, I don't know if you're familiar with Johnny Rotten of the Sex Pistols. Well, he's just bringing out his 3rd biography and autobiography, and it's self-published as well. And I thought, okay, that's where I am. That's where I want to be, And it also means that I'm working a novel now at the moment for next year, right? But in the meantime, I might decide to write a play, and that play could take me off, maybe once again to China or whatever, right? And I really, I'm answerable to myself, and that's what I want to be. I've always been my own boss, put it that way, right? And it suits me. It does suit me doing this, yeah.
So the gist of what you are saying is this can also be applicable for that female writer who posted that Facebook question. Is that even though writing is a solitary activity, but whatever follows after you finish writing, such as finding a publisher and doing all the other things, require the part played by the community. You need to go and reach into the community to find people who are willing to help you. Particularly, I mean, when you just mentioned that one person did the font for you, and another person was in charge of the cover art. So you can say that even though as a writer you do things on your own, you still need to be a part of the community that you are in, so that you can join hands and publish a work of art, particularly a fiction. Right, Conal?
This is true, and I suppose the same with my theatre, with my plays. I like to produce my own plays. I don't necessarily direct them, right? But so writing is here with my screen. Then there's the rehearsal studio. You go in there for 3 or 4 weeks, bringing all the actors together, costume. I mean, it's part of what you do. It's, like you just mentioned at the start of this program about Shakespeare, he was covering every angle as well. He was writing, directing, probably acting, producing, and it's because truthfully, as you mentioned, writing is very much, it's a one-person pursuit. Only one person can hold a pen. And I think, certainly me, I like working with people, and it's great to move it from this into that. But what happens is you basically set up a company. So I've set up a production company and a publishing company, and you just have to do that. You have to, get these people around, the expertise, directors, lighting men, sound men, sound women, costumes, actors, designers. You really can't do that, but you can be involved in all that, and that's what fascinates me, really. Yeah.
Writing itself, even though it is a one-man pursuit, it actually brings together the entire community. That's why we have different genres like plays and poetry and novels. Now that we have talked about your writing journey, let us take a deep dive into one of the two novels that we are going to be talking about today. And the first is titled Passion Play. Right. So my question to you, Conal, is what was the spark that gave you the idea to write a novel like Passion Play?
Well, I didn't set out to write a novel. That's the truth of it. I was writing fiction. And in fact, my first collection of short stories, which was published by Collins Press, it's going through a process of publishing it ourselves now, right? And I'm reading the early drafts from back then, and that was 25, 30 years ago, right? And I'm seeing very early extracts from Passion Play that I didn't realize I had written as short stories. So it just sort of came together, really. And eventually it became, I suppose what you would say is, an unstoppable force, really, that it got to such a size that it was too big for a short story. And I just wanted to follow through to the end to see where it brought me. And so there was no real original idea. It was like, this is it, and I sort of figured out what it was about as I went along through it,
So Passion Play, even though it was its origin was a short story, it snowballed into a novel, and now we have it in stores, and it is available for online purchase, as well as the print medium is also available for purchase. The links will be provided in the description box below. Conal, my next question to you is, do you think that Passion Play can be turned into an interesting stage play, Conal?
I think it probably could, because it's a one-person journey. It's a man who's very demented. But at the end of the day, I'm not a great fan of adapting stuff just for the sake of it. I think some stories lend themselves better for theatre. So I've written maybe 5 stage plays, and none of them are from Passion Play. They're separate stories, right? Because there are certain constraints with theatre, are certain possibilities as well as constraints that you can do with theatre that you can't do with a novel. And I think each media suits each storytelling differently. And so absolutely it could be. It's a one-person tormented story in a bedsit. He never leaves his bedsit. Except his head leaves the bedsit, but he stays there. It could be done, absolutely, but I don't know if that would appeal to me, really, about me doing it,
So the novel is about Pluto's mental journey, and since we are dealing with just one person, and also the novel has this surreal subject matter, is it right in assuming that if this Passion Play was turned into a stage play, it would have a wider reach and would spark further conversations regarding that surreal subject matter, Conal?
Well, 2 things. Stage plays can travel, and the traveling of a stage play is very immediate. But by the same token, a book can travel, particularly now with internet and Amazon and all that. That would be more difficult maybe 15, 20 years ago. But so, yeah, I mean, what I find is with my stage plays, you think it's over, and next thing you get an email from somebody saying, we'd like to put it on here. And I say, okay, so a stage play does have a life all of its own, right? And a book is very much, it's a sealed item. But then again, similarly, I would get an email from somebody. I got one recently from Vietnam, somebody who had just read Passion Play after all these years. And so these things, it pops up anyway. And, you know, somebody finds a book in a secondhand shop or whatever. And, you know, it all lives in its own way and, you know, in its own time. And if you're lucky, sometimes out of its own time, maybe 10, 15 years later, somebody comes across it and they will talk to me about it, yeah. So I couldn't say one is better than the other. It's just, yeah, two different sort of streams, really.
So Passion Play spoke to you more as a novel than a stage play. Then let's take another perspective then. If somebody came to you and made an offer that Passion Play can be turned into a movie. It doesn't have to be a big blockbuster movie. It can be a limited budget movie where you are given the choice of casting the male protagonist, particularly Pluto. I'm talking about Pluto, and he'll be the central focus of the movie because it will be adapted from your novel. Whom would you cast in that role?
Oh God, that's a tough one. Jesus.
Because you have to factor in the age as well, age of Pluto, and see whether any actor would fit into that role.
I'd be quite honest, you're right. I have huge experience of local actors here in Cork, right, and in Ireland, obviously, right, because I really love theatre. I go to theatre a lot. So, I mean, the name I will name, you probably won't know because it wouldn't be, you know, on movies, you know, that you would know of. But there are so many that I think would play that part brilliantly, actually. Brendan Conroy, incredible. He's just back from the States from a show. I think it's I can't remember the name, but Aidan O'Hare, who toured to China with us. Brilliant. Kieran Birmingham, like there's so many actually. Yeah, but those names really won't resonate with anybody who isn't Irish. People will know them because they're big stage actors and they'd be very well known in the theatre circuit. But beyond Ireland, well, there'd be a certain, you know, but maybe not in India.
Yeah, and do you think that
if you want someone that they know, I would say Brad Pitt.
Why does he have Irish ancestry, Conal?
Pardon?
I mean, does he have any Irish ancestry or link with
Pluto?
Is that why you recommended Brad Pitt?
Oh, Brad Pitt, no, he'd be Hollywood to the core, but
he'd be suitable. If you would pick one, it would be Brad Pitt then.
Well, I was being sarcastic because I don't think he would take that part. He's far too big for it, right? But Brad Pitt is huge, obviously, right? And I'm a huge fan of his work. But he would be obviously known. But no, I would certainly go with Aidan O'Hare and Kieran Birmingham and, you know, Brendan Conroy. Those are the kind of people that I would see playing Pluto, you know, definitely.
So you have been putting on many hats, like being a novelist, a playwright, and you also talked about your experience as a documentary filmmaker. What prompted you to get into this field? Do you have any background knowledge in filmmaking, Conal?
No. No,
I'm asking whether you studied filmmaking before you became a writer. In that sense, I'm asking Conal.
Like, see, I suppose they all are different forms of storytelling, you know, and the truth is I can write a story, but I wouldn't have a clue about how to make a book, how to physically make a book. Similarly, I can put together a film in my head, but you bring in the technical people, you bring in the camera people, the lighting people, the editors, the sound people, you know, and like the reality is when you sort of declare that you make these things, you actually don't. What you do is you assemble a really good team to make them for you, is what happens. And it's the same with the books. You know, you assemble a team. So and with film, the same thing. I don't even take photographs with a camera, with a phone. You know, it's not my thing. But I have a visual storytelling sense, and I just think, God, I'd love to make a story about that thing. And then I will draw together these people who are really technically skilled, and that's so I suppose it's a misnomer to say that I make them. I don't actually. I just gather people around me who are very qualified, and you know.
So you assemble a team of your own, and you make documentaries, and that must mean that you have a passing interest in making films. Do you think that you could try a hand in making movies set in Ireland, Conal?
You know, I could try, but the reality is, for me, as I see it, right, that it's such a long process. I don't know if I'd have the tenacity to stick with a project that long. To get a film made, it takes an awful long time. Outside even writing the script, which is probably the shortest amount of time you spend, it just takes years. You know, getting funding, trying to organize. It's a big process, and because of that, I have shied away from that world, really. I'm now thinking about, because of COVID, actually, maybe filming on stage some of my plays, so that they're filmed specifically as a piece of theatre to be screened from a theatre, but to a non-live audience. But that is different to making a film, because a film it's a whole different expense. With filming a play on stage, the process is much more sort of telescoped down into, you know, it's one location, you know, it's broken down very simply, without even costume changes. It's a piece of theatre filmed, you know, and edited. In a way, filming theatre, my own plays, is a small bit like documentary making, because it's honed right down, the narrative is, you know, and so like making films is something I've stayed away from, really, because I just wouldn't. It just seems too big a project to take on, you know. I want to be writing too. I'm an obsessive writer, and I wouldn't have 2 or 3 years to devote to making a film, you know.
So alternately, writing a stage play is much simpler, because you're done once you finish the script, and you leave it in the hands of the theatre director to do everything else. Can you walk us through the process of actually writing the script, and then sitting in the theatre and seeing all your creative pursuits being enacted on the stage? And how do you feel when you walk out? Do you feel satisfied that your vision has been represented on the stage, Conal?
Sometimes well, you know, here's a funny thing, right? Because I'm usually involved in the rehearsal as well, right? I write the script, and if there's a director involved, we talk about it, and at different times, and then eventually it goes out to actors, and actors decide to take it or not, and then they will come in. And in my head as the writer, right, I have a very great sense of what this play is going to look like in my head. Like, I can see it as I'm writing it on a stage. An interesting thing in the process, and I'm sure any writer who writes plays will tell you this, that once it's presented to you by actors, it obviously is totally different from the way you have envisioned it. But there is some kind of thing happens that you believe it's the way you always saw it. You know, you think, yeah, that's exactly as but it isn't. You know, it's and that's fascinating, because the thing about theatre, and I'm sure with a lot of other stuff, but with theatre, is that everybody comes to add value to what you've done, right? So if I've written a script, the costume person tries to make the script better, the lighting person makes the script better, the sound person, the director, the theatre, the set, And at the end of the day, it's a bit, I always think it's a bit like having a stable of, at the end of the day, it's all about the actor, because the actor then must put all this thing onto them, would be a woman or a man, and they must go out onto the stage on their own and deliver it. Now, if the play is a disaster, people like me can vanish into the bar and forget about it. They have to stay there, right? They have to stay there that night. And then the next night, after it's been on the newspaper, it's a disaster. They have to go back there again. They have to go back. So in a funny way, the script and the lighting and the set and the costume are only all component parts that are put onto an actor. And I think people often think, I think that theatre is definitely about actors. They are left there, right? I think maybe film is more about directors. It's about the director's vision of how it all looks. But I think it's all about making it as good and as convincing as you can for an actor to deliver it. And that's the process. At the end of the day, when you go in to see your show, I remember the first time I had a play on in New York, I didn't tell the theatre that I was there because I was sort of shy. And I went in, bought a ticket, and I was sitting there and I was just dreading it. And the play got a standing ovation, and I must say it was quite incredible. And at the end of the day, it's only another story being told by another person. You know, it's not earth-shattering. It's not about life or death. It's not even about, you know, richness, poverty. It's just a story being told. But because it's a story that you're involved in, it means an awful lot personally. But I'm aware of the fact that, it's disposable as well, you know. But yeah, it's a good feeling when people applaud your work, you know. It's one of the few businesses when you finish your day's work that people will applaud your work. I don't know any other business, be it a bartender or a factory worker or a taxi driver or a government official, that every day when they finish their work, that everybody stands up and claps. So, I mean, that can only be good, you know, it can only be good.
So when the audience stand and applaud after seeing the version they see on the stage, you must have felt elated and happy that your vision has been fulfilled. But you also mentioned that you attended rehearsals and you also watched the final end product on the day of the play's enactment. So is it all right in assuming that the creative energies that forms during that actual enactment infects you in a way and makes you feel that your vision has been granted full autonomy then?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's always just a sense of relief. I mean, show business is a bit like a circus, you know. It's a lot of things can happen, you know, like anything can happen, you know. I've been at a play where an actor fell off the stage. I've been at a play, I went to a play once where one of the audience got up, turned around and got a heart attack and fell onto the stage. So you can't really tell what's going to happen. So a lot of it is just a relief that it's over and it worked out okay and nobody died, you know. And it's a bit of fun. It's always about, you know, it's self-indulgence. The arts, without a doubt, it's all about indulging your own head and other people come in to help you with it. You know, it's self-indulgence and it's a very privileged place for someone like me to be, you know. Because I've had those other jobs as well, and they're not so privileged. In the arts is good, you know, yeah, always.
So we have been talking about your experiences as a dramatist. Now let's get back to Passion Play. Passion Play is about Pluto's post-death journey to heaven. What I wanted to ask you is, do you believe in this idea that after someone dies, they have another life somewhere else, Conal? What I wanted to ask is there life after death? Do you prescribe in this idea?
Okay, well, I'd be sarcastic first by saying I often wonder if there's life before death. You know, a lot of people spend their life working so that they can find heaven when they die. And sometimes I think you might be better off trying to find heaven here on earth. And that might be the fast, direct road to an afterlife, if there is one, to heaven after. What I believe in, belief is a very funny one, right? And the truth is, at a very basic level, belief means there's an absence of proof. So, for example, right, if I tell you that my book Passion Play is yellow, you have to believe me because you haven't seen it, right? Whereas then if I say, there it is, then you will know, okay, so then there's no more belief involved, right? So belief is all about the absence of proof. And what I believe in over my life, my beliefs have changed a lot. Like when I was a child, I vehemently believed in Santa Claus. You know, I really believed there was a Santa Claus, and then there wasn't. Some people believe, one thing I do know, because I believe it again, I don't know it, but what I believe is that the earth as we know it is 4.5 billion years old. Civilization as we know it, they say, even though humankinds have been around 200,000 years, the civilization they say is about 6,000 years, right? Which is a blip in 4.5 billion years, right? So what I would think is that humankind as we know it will be long gone, maybe for 4.5 billion years, and this earth will still be circling around the sun. That's what I sort of believe. Where we go as a species, whether we go to another afterlife, I don't know. I would love to think that we do, that we go somewhere special and somewhere pleasant and somewhere kind, and that when we get there, we'll meet everybody that we've always loved. But I just don't know. And I don't know what I believe, because my beliefs regularly have been challenged by myself. And that's the truth of it, you know.
So life gives you an ocean of knowledge, and the further you go, the more you realize that the things that you learn about life are mostly misinformation, and you have been misled about a lot of things. Do you think that age comes into factors into this? Factors into your own self-knowledge about the world, or do you think that it is everyone's culture that imbibes these ideologies in us, Conal?
Yeah, well, I think age has a big influence, you know, because truthfully, well, age and other things, you know. I think, for example, like in my grandfather's time, a lot of people in Ireland may not have been able to read. They certainly wouldn't have had the internet. They certainly wouldn't have access to television. So information would have maybe come from a very specific channel. And so if that's your total information, your decision making is very limited. So it isn't even just age. It's also the amount of, I suppose, information you let yourself open to access. But I do think that as you get older, well, particularly, I can only speak for my own experience, my own culture. As a younger person, I would have had huge sort of respect in the integrity of adults, and then suddenly I become an adult, and I just realize I'm as, you know, confused as everybody else, you know. And so just because I'm an adult doesn't mean I know the answers. I can probably give a better answer than I could when I was 10 years of age, but I still don't know the answer. And I think that's the big revelation, that as you get older, you realize that you really don't know that much anyway. And I think if you could admit that to yourself, then you start questioning your younger self and what, I suppose, the received information you received as a younger person from adults that you assumed had, you know, boundless knowledge of all things, you know. And so, yeah, I mean, the thing is that I think as I get older, certainly I feel I've learned more, and that gives me, I suppose, a broader pick and choose or pick and mix of what I understand about this world. I still don't understand anything. What I know is that small.
Yeah, you are right in saying that with age comes wisdom, and you said you just said that you learned a lot after becoming an adult, but also that when you were young, you saw adults and they seemed as though they had everything figured out. But when you became an adult, you realized that they were as much clueless as you were as an adult. So moving on to the next question. Um, we were talking about the afterlife and the surreal subject matter that we were discussing about is actually Pluto's vision of heaven. And according to Pluto, his vision of heaven is his hometown, Cork City. Do you have any particular reason as to why you had Pluto imagining his own hometown, which represents his vision of what heaven would look like, Conal?
Well, very briefly, the book is about a young man who was fairly tormented in his brain, and he is facing eviction. He has nothing. It's Good Friday, which is the day that Christ died, right? And he's 33 years of age, same age that Christ was when he died. And in his tormented mind, he decides that the only way he can live forever, because he's thinking about famous people, politicians, people like Elvis Presley, people like politicians like Mahatma Gandhi, whatever, right? Like the only way, it's only after someone dies that they take on this eternal life, because people will remember them forever. So he decides to take his own life, but he's also in a very desperate situation. In the process of taking his life, he takes 2 LSD tablets. They're very hallucinogenic drugs. And so once he dies very suddenly. His mind is still active, and his mind brings him on a journey back through his childhood, but it's because of the hallucinogenic drugs that is actually telling the story, it's a bit all over the place, right? And eventually he finds the woman he has always loved and lost. And, as the story has been told, you realize it's actually a funny story, right? It's a funny book. You realize that he's a bit hopeless, right? And everything he's tried has been rubbish. And that he has caused most of the problems in his own life by just being a bit sort of non-committal and all kinds of things. But at the very end, he meets the woman that he has always loved, and they spend this magical day just wandering around, and she brings him up my street, up the hill at the top of my street. Patrick's Hill is a very steep hill, and he doesn't realize he's dead because it's in his mind, right? But so everybody he meets is actually dead, but he doesn't notice because it's his mind is telling the story. And they look out over the north side. The north side is where I'm from, of Cork City, and my school is there, Shandon, all these very iconic buildings that mean a lot to me personally. And he looks out there, and it's like he just gets this moment that this is the place that drove him to kill himself, this hellish world that he lives in, right? But as he looks out, he's with the woman he loves, the sun is going down, and he sees all these places of his youth. He gets this moment and he just says, Chicas, this could be heaven. And he doesn't realize, but she's in heaven. And she says, well, maybe it is. And so that's, I suppose the point I'm making really is that the torment that we have, like we often think that, well, if I can get out of here and go to someplace like Spain, or if I can get out of here and go to someplace like England, or if I can get out of here and go to someplace like America, all my problems will be over. But I think the human condition is that when you go to Spain, England, or America, you actually bring yourself with you. And with yourself comes whatever ails you. And I think that's the thing that he realizes, or the reader realizes. He mightn't even realize that the issues are not this place. The issues are, in the heart, or in the soul, or in the head. And so yeah, that is why his vision of heaven is actually the place. Like heaven and hell are the same place. It's just how you react to them, or how they react to you is what makes them different. That's the thesis, I guess, in this story.
So yeah, your vision of heaven seems to coincide with the Pluto's vision of heaven. Is that right, Conal?
No, Pluto is totally fictional, right?
Because you mentioned that absence of proof means that you have some kind of belief in the afterlife, Conal.
I don't know if I have a belief in the afterlife. I really don't know. I actually really, right now where my head is, I think that this is it. I'm open to change. Maybe the closer I get to the afterlife, in other words, the older I get, maybe I might find a belief coming at me again. But right now, it's not any stereotypical, I suppose, explanation of an afterlife doesn't really resonate with me. So it's not even a matter of not believing. I just don't know. I'm taking life as it comes.
So can we say that Pluto's journey and his vision of heaven is somewhat of a playmaking on your part, where you are playing with your own ideas about what heaven would look like then, Conal?
Absolutely. I think what is, rather than playing, it's an exploration, really, rather than playing, because when I'm writing these things, like when I started writing about Pluto, I had no idea that on the last page, he would be up in Patrick's Hill around the corner from my house, looking out on the north side saying, this is heaven. I had no idea. So that is something that's that's part of the experience. It's a journey that I go on with the writing process. And I think that's what writing is. If I was to plan it out A to Z, I suppose, I don't know if you have this thing in India where you paint by numbers, children's books, right? Well, if I did, that's what it would be. For me, each day I go back to find out where am I going with this. It's a discovery. And I think at the end, what I discovered, if discovered is a word, but within that exploration, there was a sense that, no, heaven is here. Heaven is here if I wanted to be here. It's about how I react with myself, with people around me. It's not somewhere way out there. And that is that exploration. That book is 20 years ago, so a lot could happen in my mind since, but that's how I felt then. And maybe at that time I was questioning, I can't remember, maybe I was questioning, what am I doing here? What am I doing in this country, And then I realized, actually, no, maybe it's about me. Maybe I need to change my perspective, not what's around me. Maybe what's around me is perfect, and maybe what's in here needs to be readjusted. So that's what the journey was about, actually,
Suicide seems to be a sensitive topic everywhere, and in this particular novel, Pluto is under the influence of drugs before committing suicide. What I wanted to ask you is, Pluto being a young man, let's look at it from Pluto's point of view. Even though he's a fictional character, let's look at it this way. When Pluto was born, his mind must have been a blank slate. So it is the role of the society as well as the family members, and who fill in the details in that empty slate. They give you the idea of, they must have given Pluto's ideas about religion, about community, and how Pluto can depend on others in order to bring himself up in the society. So do you think that Pluto's society and Pluto's family failed in imbibing him with self-confidence during those times of filling in the slate, Conal?
Not particularly, because within the brain journey in that book, right, you go back and you meet his family, you meet his father and you meet his sister. And in fact, the story begins with his mother. Very sad, actually. The mother goes down that street there behind me, Pine Street, outside my window, and she goes to the river. We have a river in Cork called the Lee, and she takes off her shoes and she walks down and she drowns herself. Now, as a child, he was told that she didn't drown herself, that she went into the river to save a swan, and that she did save the swan, but she died in the process. So his life was, I suppose, there was an overshadow of suicide. And as he grew older, he realized, actually, this is wrong. She actually went and drowned herself. She didn't save a swan, right? But as a child, it's the myth of belief. He was told that swan comes back to Cork every single year and gives birth to a baby white cygnet in memory of his mother. And, So he spent his whole life thinking that his mother died a very heroic death, and then he realized, actually, no, she didn't. She died desperate. And so I think sometimes to infer that the problems that I have in my life or Pluto has in his life is because of a previous generation, I don't think that's actually really accurate, because truthfully, then that means that what about the next generation? Are they, like, is the previous generation also answerable for the next generation? I think each person, once you reach the age of reason, some say that's 7 or 12 or 14, but we'll just say, for argument's sake, 20 years of age, right? Once people reach that level of maturity, there are choices to be made, right? Some people can make their choices easier because they have been indulged in life and they have education. They may have some kind of family background, money. They may have all these things that will help them along. Other people don't. But whether you have these benefits or not, some people make the wrong decisions. So some people who have all the things in the world can still make the bad decisions and end up. So I think there's something in all of us that is either self-destruct or self, whatever, promote or look after, right? And that's the luck of the draw. And it has to do with who you meet. It has to do with the economy. It has to do with the climate you live in. It's a very complicated thing that makes us make decisions. And sometimes somebody with too much confidence can do as much damage to themselves as somebody with not enough confidence. So it's life is a lotto. It's you can have the numbers in your favor if you're lucky, and you have good family connections, or you can come from a very deprived area. But there's no guarantee that one or the other is going to lead to greatness or to happiness or to even success or just even normality. Some people have inherent emotional problems that their own parents can't resolve anyway. So it's Pluto has that. Pluto has issues in himself, and he also has big drug-taking issues within himself. So it's not really coming from his parents or his home. But he's coming from a rough part of town. Yeah.
So when you look at the Pluto's life from that perspective, on one side of the spectrum you have no confidence, and on the other side of the spectrum you have too much of confidence. And you're saying that both the extremes are bad for anyone to deal with.
There's no guarantee. There's no guarantee. Sometimes great success can come from great privilege. So it's hard to. There's no rule really, right? Life just plays its own cards, and sometimes you're slipped an ace, sometimes you're slipped a joker, and you can't tell.
You just have to play with the cards you are dealt with.
Yeah.
My next question to you is: I found a lot of Christian metaphors in your novel Passion Play. Can you tell us about those strong Christian metaphors in Passion Play, Conal?
Well. First of all, it's called Passion Play, which is like in Christian, I suppose, in Christian tradition, every Easter, the Passion of Jesus is a big event, and there is a tradition of having, like from the 1600s or even earlier, these mystery plays which are played out of the crucifixion. And in fact, in 2000, the year 2000, I had a crucifixion on Patrick's Hill here. It was a theatrical production of the crucifixion of Christ, because it was 2,000 years since he was born. And so the name Passion Play, that's where that comes from. The main character, Pluto, well, his name is Paul O'Toole. So his nickname is Pluto, but Pluto is also the god of the underworld, as opposed to the Passion of Jesus being the god of heaven or whatever. Then you have, it's set on Good Friday, which is the Good Friday is the day that Jesus would have had the Passion of Jesus, at Easter and all that. He was 33 years of age, and then there are a lot of I suppose motifs in the novel. So that there's a whole scene where a family have a baby in a drawer. A small child called Tragic Ted he's in the novel, and he's found up the street with the family, the mother and the father, and they've been evicted, and they had the baby in the drawer as a bed, and they're going to get the boat to England the next day, and they're found there, and they're brought back to live on the street. And that image of the mother, the father, and the baby in a drawer is you know, it's I suppose it's a reference to the birth of Jesus, Joseph, Mary, and the crib. Even in the final, on his journey to heaven, when he goes up Patrick's Hill, he looks back into the city because it's a steep hill, and surprisingly, he uses the words, "We don't turn to salt," and that's a reference to the Old Testament, where Lot's wife, when she looked back on the destruction of their city, she was told, "Do not look back," and she looked back, and she was turned to salt. So there are a lot of these, I suppose, a lot of those, I suppose, biblical references, really, and in a funny way, that's not really to inform the reader. It's part of the process of enjoying the process of writing. Because I'm sort of saying, oh yes, I put this in here. That sounds interesting, and so I usually don't even point it out to people because it's not there to be found. It's there for me to enjoy writing. Sometimes people might ask, was that a reference to, you know, to the Bible or whatever? And yeah, you know, there's it crops up all the time, actually, right? There's a whole lot of, I suppose, a lot of them are just an image. It's just a snapshot from the Bible, but I put into a normal situation and you may not even see it. So a prime example is the family in the doorway with the baby in a drawer. You know, that no room at the inn, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. That's it, snapshot. And then that child grows up to be Pluto's friend. You know, so.
Yeah. So you were talking about a lot of religious motives in Passion Play. One motive I found was this idea of reincarnation, and you have widely used this reincarnation philosophy in Passion Play. I found out that the idea of reincarnation is widely discussed in ancient Hindu texts. So how does Christianity see reincarnation as a concept, and does it ascribe to such idea, Conal?
Well, reincarnation is like, you know, it's obviously different to an afterlife because in Christianity, the belief is that you go on to another place and you don't come back. So I suppose in very basic layman terms, in Christianity, life it's one race to the end. And at the end, you know, you where you turn up, it dictates where you go. From what little I know about reincarnation, it's a process of going back and improving on or not improving on. It's a process of return and further redemption. With Christianity, that's not the belief. That Christianity, there's a sense that you get one life to run, and at the end of it, you know, it's all marked up, and you basically make your, you know, what you have done in your life dictates where you go. End of story, you know. So it's what it does mean is that the both traditions, and I'm not saying one or the other, do have a sense of an afterlife, that you don't just die and that's the end of it. Both of them have a sense of another thing happening after death, but the subtle difference has been that the final location is dictated at the end of Christianity, whereas with reincarnation, it might involve like another run of the same of a similar process, you know.
So I wanted to ask you about reincarnation because Hinduism believes in the idea that life and death are circles. I mean, there is a circle of life and death, and we prescribe to the idea that you are given 7 lives, and after every life, your karma is taken into account, and your next life is dependent on your previous life's karma. Yes. So what you are saying, I'm under this impression that Christianity sees reincarnation more as a straight line, where the beginning point is life and the end point is death. Am I right in saying that, Conal?
You're right in that it's there aren't 7. Like basically, yes, you get one life, and at the end of that life, your karma is judged. You know, that's where you are then, and it's heaven or hell. There were two other stages before, limbo and purgatory, but I think they've more been taken out of the theology now. It's either left or right, heaven or hell.
So does Irish mythology have a different concept of heaven and hell when compared to Christianity then?
Well,
Celtic mythology, I mean, does it involve Celtic mythology then?
The interesting thing is that Celtic mythology, as in like, so pre-Christian, pre-Christian would be very, very different to our Christian belief, right? And I wouldn't,
because it predates Christianity, Celtic mythology.
Yeah, and you know, even the whole arrival of Christianity to Ireland is very much in a funny way. You know, you don't, you know, there's a sort of mythological aspect to the arrival, because there are all these names of people like Saint Patrick, Saint Bridget, and they're, you know, there's epic stories around their arrival and how they converted the Irish and how they converted with, you know, there's a very famous story of the shamrock, and they used the shamrock to, you know, explain the Trinity of Christianity, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, and but on one stem being one God, but three different deities. Like, there was absolutely a whole different belief system, and maybe many belief systems, but I really don't know, right? I don't know the specifics. But Christianity did come, and it has been a Christian, I suppose, predominantly. Well, see, the funny thing is, when I say Christian, that sounds like that I am saying that we are a Christian country, right? What I'm really saying is that it's a Christian tradition, you know, that certainly in my father's time and in my mother's time, it was very much, you know, predominantly a Catholic Christian country that was very sort of, I suppose, driven by that whole thing. I think now it's a sense of maybe just more like we come from a Christian tradition, that a lot of our, maybe the good values or bad values or wherever they are, that they're fed by a tradition that's, you know, hundreds of years old. Even if we reject them, even if we reject our Christian past or present, whatever, the symbolism is still everywhere around us, you know. And it's sometimes I would think somebody who would, for example, like all over the city, there are shrines to the Virgin Mary, like all over the city, right? And I don't see them anymore. Most Irish people don't, because they're just everywhere. Because 1962, I think, was the Marian year. So a lot of these shrines went up. There's one just out the street there. There's a huge one over there in this is central downtown, right? But so we don't often take in this imagery that's coming at us. Like every day at midday, the radio plays the Angelus bells, and at 6 o'clock, the television does as well, right? So, but we actually don't really buy into it that much. Whereas I got a feeling somebody from outside this country, they would see it being very sort of visible, you know. So yeah, the tradition is very strong. Like even if you don't believe in it or don't agree with it, it's a strong tradition. That's where we live, you know.
We just took a deep dive into passion play. Now let's move on to Begotten Not Made, your second novel, which you're going to talk about here. Let's get to know more about Begotten Not Made. Can you tell us about the title's significance in the novel Begotten Not Made, Conal?
Okay, it sounds like I'm obsessed by religion, but I'm not. I suppose maybe, I don't know. Basically, back in the 4th century, I think it was 325. I think it was Emperor Constantine. Basically, the Christianity, as we know it, was sort of had a lot of different strands going different ways and different beliefs and in an effort to bring it all together, I think it was Constantine brought the greatest minds of the time together in Nicaea and in what's present day Turkey, right? And they devised, I suppose, well, there was particularly one person called Arius who one of his big issues, but it was rampant at the time. Christianity was very divided, right? One of his issues was the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. Could God the Son exist at the same time as God the Father? Like, because God the Father must give, beget God the Son, as in Jesus, right? And this was causing big issues within. So they came up with in 325 in the Nicene Creed, which is also, there's another version called the Apostles' Creed, and that creed is basically the belief, because creed is the belief. It tried to pull together all the different strands of Christianity and say, look, this is what we believe in, right? And one of the lines in that is, begotten, not made, one in being with the Father, through him all things were made. And that expression, begotten, not made, in a funny way, causes a certain ambiguity, because the term to beget means, accurately, it means to give birth, really, but through, I suppose, through natural methods, right? And so, but it's implied that believers, like, so Christian believers, it's implied that that the divinity of Jesus is intact. And so that's why I picked that that title, because it comes from the Nicene Creed, or the Apostles' Creed, begotten, not made. And because I suppose one of the theories in the book examines if Jesus was divine or if he was of man, and that's why I called it that, basically. Yeah.
So is it right in saying that Catholic Christian beliefs are the backdrop of both the stories in the novels then?
Well, they are, but at the end of the day, what they really are, it's about person's head, what's going on in one person's head, not necessarily my head. The man in this, in Begotten Not Mad, he's not Begotten Not Made. He's an elderly Christian brother, and he is now 70 years of age. And when he was a young Christian brother, at the time when there was huge vocations joining the church, he happened to meet, when he was 20 years of age, a young nun from a neighboring convent. They met on one night, and they had a very intense meeting, because they were in the kitchen organizing food for the rest of the two things, he spent his whole life regretting that he didn't, for whatever reason, tell her he loved her or whatever, right? But every single morning since that night, she has flashed the light in the convent in her bedroom window, because she told him where it was, and every morning he flickers his light bulb back. So this has gone on for 50 years, and it's Christmas morning, Christmas Eve, and it's 7 o'clock Christmas Eve, and her light doesn't flick. And it's 50 years later, and he suddenly realizes that that he loves this woman, and this whole life of flickering light bulbs has just been a total smokescreen. So he has to wait until it gets dark again to flicker his light, and he spends the whole day going back over that one night that they met. And on that night that they met, he told her this theory he had developed about begotten, not made. And it was a theory of a very young Christian brother who was very devout and was so fascinated by the Bible that he was going into every detail and all kinds of levels, so much so that the theologian in the monastery was saying, would you ever just calm down? But it was just that moment in time that he sort of blurted all this out to this nun, and to this young nun. And so I figured the theory, whatever the theory, when it gets dark, he decides that maybe he should go to the convent and tell her if she's still alive. Maybe she left the convent, he doesn't know, right? So that's what the story is about. What happens when he goes over to the convent in the darkness of night, Christmas Eve, with the snow falling. And it's a very romantic story, actually. It's a love story. And love is very cerebral. And so he was very much in love right through the book, through his life. But he was also very tormented and suffered with a lot of problems as well, personal problems. So it's an exploration, Yeah.
Before a while ago, you were saying that before the advent of internet and all these facets of information that we get right now, you said that before all these things, before the intervention of technology into a person's life, we had limited channels of information, which came from our community through through a very narrow path, I would say. You were talking about Brother Scully and how he got this idea from the Bible that Jesus was begotten, not made. Was he influenced by this limited channel of information? Was that what you are trying to say, or was he right in assuming that it is a fact, Conal?
First of all, right, his only channel of information was the Bible, the New Testament, really, right? And I don't really want to give the story away, but what he realized very early, so initially he was examining all kinds of small sort of, and there are a lot of sort of, minor kind of complications in the story as it's told, because in the New Testament, it's basically 4 versions of the same story told by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so there's a lot of repetition in the 4 stories, but some of them, they slightly contradict each other in very minor ways, right? So never enough to actually say, oh, this is, and I'd be quite honest with you, I actually, I really enjoy Luke's, because Luke, his version is sort of more, as I would say, the storyteller, but they were also written at different times. And so having found these small anomalies that really didn't amount to much, like, so for example, he would say, why did an angel, so he would talk to theologian, why did an angel call to Mary, and then why did an angel come to Joseph? Why didn't one angel come to Mary and Joseph together? Like, why didn't God send down one angel? Because the 2 different stories, and the theologians just saying, look, just relax, just indulge, like, read the gospel and the story will become manifest, But one of the things he realized was that the story that unites the 4 gospels is that there's the story of Jesus's family. So you have Joseph, Mary, and Jesus, right? And you also have Jesus' cousins, right? Basically Zachariah, that's married to Mary's cousin, and John, who is John the Baptist. And he realized this very early, right? That, okay, there's a family unit there, right? And then he realized there was another family unit in it, but that they're not talked about. They're at the very beginning of the story, they're at the birth of Jesus, and they're at the very end of the story. And that family is King Herod's family. And then he realized that King Herod had killed Zachariah. His son had killed John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin, and now his son is faced with killing Jesus. And you start thinking, what's going on here? Why is this king trying to kill this illegitimate child born in the stable? So this is what's going through this mind of this, I suppose, what you could say, deluded Christian young brother who was totally obsessed by the Bible and all things biblical. And that's where he is, right? And that's the journey he's on. It's not necessarily my belief. It's not even my journey. It's his journey. But that's the backbone to the story. That is what. That's what. And he happens to blurt it out that night, 50 years ago, to the young nun. The young nun goes back to the convent, and she mentions it there, and the whole thing just gets blown out of proportion. Like, so, his life becomes really ruined in a funny way because of this crisis, and he has had to live with it or deal with it ever since, and that's the basis of that, without actually giving the story away. That's sort of it.
Before we move on to the next question, I would like to remind our audience that myself and Conal are not here to scrutinize Christianity or any other religion. Let me give you 2 important points regarding that. The first point is religion does not stand on its own. People who follow that any religion keep the religion alive. The second point I would like to remind you is religion is a part of life. It is a part of humanity, and any form of literature, be it fiction or drama, talk about humanity and talk about the different aspects of life. With those 2 points in mind, I hope our audience remember that we are here to discuss about the crux of the novel Begotten Not Made, which itself is about religion and different sides of it, different facets of it. So on to the next question, Conal. You talked about the significance of the title. You said that you wrote the first novel when you were much younger than now, and the reflections that you had while writing that novel must have been different from what you were having when you were writing Begotten Not Made. Can you walk us through the experience of writing Begotten Not Made and having such beliefs?
Well, truthfully, Begotten Not Made, when I finished writing Passion Play, I continued writing. And what I was writing actually was Begotten Not Made. And my next novel is also part of that. So like I am writing Begotten Not Made since 1999. So I didn't stop writing. It's the same process of discovery. And I would just like to reiterate what you were saying there, that these are works of fiction. They're not what I believe. And basically, if I was to write a character who murdered someone, right, that doesn't mean that I believe in murder as any solution for anything, right? This is purely an investigation of a character who finds, in this case, himself in a very confined place when all around him is changing, when vocations stop coming to join the convent and the monastery, and he is thinking, my God, I joined here thinking that when I'm elderly, there'll be a whole community here to support me, but here I am, and I'm more or less on my own. There are no young people joining. And so this is an investigation of a character, of a fictional character who has his own problems that he's dealing with and processing through. And in fact, I actually went to a Christian Brothers school, and I must say I had a really good experience there. Truthfully, that some of the better teachers I've ever met were Christian Brothers. And what I found interesting was that when I was a child, these schools were run by Christian Brothers, and there was like huge amounts of Christian Brothers in the school, right? Now all the Christian Brothers are gone because people didn't join. And I often think that those young brothers then, they must have thought back then in the 60s and the 70s that when they were elderly, that they would have a whole community around them to support them and listen to their stories, and it didn't happen. A lot of them ended up being very isolated and alone and lonely. And I think that's what spurred me to write this story about that change. It's about a change in a society rather than any big sort of discussion on, religion or any of that kind of stuff. It's about how a generation who devote themselves to a vocation that sort of slipped off society's radar at that time, the next generation didn't have. And that's basically the essence of it, really,
So the essence of the story Begotten Not Made is all about having different ideas when it comes to religion from different perspectives, like from the perspective of Brother Scully and Sister Claire. So Brother Scully was insecure enough to blurt out his own theory at such a young age, and Sister Claire indeed revealed it to everyone else. So these are the different facets that we were talking about when it comes to fiction. These are imaginary tales, and through fiction we can learn a lot about life from my perspective. So you gave a nice answer when you told us that you can find different strands of religion, different strands of Christianity in the text. My previous question was is partly related to the question that I'm going to ask now, and that is, let us say, for example, on your first 2 days of writing Begotten Not Made, and on day 1 you had a particular belief about religion, and on the second day you sat down and you wrote and you had a different perspective on the same idea. Do you think that those kind of complexities occurred when you wrote Begotten Not Made, Conal?
I would say yes. I would say that definitely my perspective changes all the time because you're informed by different things, and the more you're informed, the more your perspective and the more your view changes. I would say certainly in the last 20 years, I would hold different views, but it's a bit like it's a bit like if you're taking baby steps, you don't see the change. Whereas if you come into the room every 5 minutes, you will see that someone is moving from there to there because it looks like a jump. But when you're living with it on a day-to-day basis and you're going back to the first page and you're rewriting it, and you sort of grow with it. So, like, truthfully, I would not have started out to write a book about this. In fact, the story I was writing was a different story, and I had written literally thousands of pages, and I pulled out this as a standalone story, a standalone novel. The next novel is to be pulled out of the rest of the text, and the next novel is called "Glory Be to the Father," which is it's another line from a prayer. Yeah.
So I asked you this question because I was curious as to whether you had the same notion from beginning to end. Let me reiterate. When you sat down and wrote Begotten Not Made, you must have had a complete or a partial idea as to how Brother Scully's story will end. Did it change in between during your writing process, or were you able to keep up with the same story crux from beginning to end, Conal?
How it ended, the very last end, that would have come together literally in the last few months, having spent 20 years to do this. Because even with the one I'm writing at the moment, it's more or less all there. The whole book is written. There's thousands. It's all written there, right? But I haven't written the last page yet because I'm not too sure how it will finish. And so the very ending about what he was to find out, whether she was alive, whether she really existed. See, we don't even know if she really exists because he has been very tormented. This young brother has suffered with a lot of illnesses and a lot of delusion, and there are areas where, like, there's a time when he believes that there is a bridge, a light bridge, bringing from his bedroom window to her bedroom window, and he walks across the light bridge. And he really believes he is doing this, and he can see the city below him, and he stops and he sits down and he's looking at the city, and it's basically an investigation of the city again, right? And when he gets to her bedroom window, the sun starts rising, and as the sun rises, he realizes he must run back because the light bridge will disappear once the sun rises, because the light will go in the brightness. So it's about somebody who lives his life at night in darkness, and also I think he's in his emotions are in a dark place. The very last section of the book, that was written at the very end, and that was the big redemption. And similar to Passion Play, I didn't really know where that was going to end, and then the last section just came together, and the next one, I hope, will come the same way, that I will find how to bring the whole lot together. And ideally, I like to end with a redemptive, a sense of this is all about something, that the narratives come together in some kind of form to sort of inform me, basically, first of all, but also a reader of that there is hope, that there is, I suppose, love or whatever it is, that it's not all about nothing, it's about something. And but I'm very slow to get to that point. I like to get the rest of it really finished first, and then it's a bit like a sprint to the end. Okay, just go with it. And because if I start with an end, it sort of does too much. So no, it's in development right through, to answer your question, from start to finish, development right through, and then the end comes in at the very end. Yeah.
So when you begin a novel, you don't think about the ending. You just go talk about the journey of the protagonist, and only at the end or during the finishing stages of the novel, you conceive of how the journey should end. So
this is true. I have a rough idea where it's going. I do have a rough idea all the time, right, where it's going, but that's subject to change. And as the book develops, there are usually 2 or 3 options about what way will I go at the end, right? And then I have to make a call on myself personally, how I feel. And I also like to say too that this is a really privileged place for you to be asking me these questions, because at the end of the day, I just like to write, I like to explore, I really enjoy it, right? And at the end of the day, it's just storytelling, you know, and it's a very, like, for you to take the time to interview and for your listeners to listen to these questions and answers, it's a very special privilege. You know, I'm well aware that it's not, you know, I don't feel the need to inform the world of what's going on in my head or my characters' heads, but I do enjoy the process. And the process towards the end is I have to make a split decision at the very end. Where are we going with this? But I usually have a few in my head before I get to that point. Yeah.
It's a privilege for us, Conal, because we are always curious about what goes on in an author's mind while writing their stories, and even from an academic perspective, in the future, maybe any student of literature might do research on you and your works, and this particular episode of the Writer's Preview will be a great source of secondary information regarding, even a primary source of information regarding your work. So we are happy to be a part of this tradition, this literary tradition, and we are happy to have you with us. And moving on to the next question, you said that Sister Claire might be concocted by Brother Scully's imagination. Would it also make the actual story of Jesus's birth a fiction? I mean, a part of his own imagination. Then did he imagine this to be true, which he got from the Bible?
Okay, see, the point is, right, the essence of Begotten Not Made, right, is it's all about belief. So the whole story, right, is, as a reader or as a writer, as me writing, I keep finding myself. So there's one whole series where there is a pigeon, and this pigeon is a hero. The pigeon goes off to the war and he saves 3 guys from Cork, right? He walks back, he flies across through no man's land, and he's shot, he's hit by a grenade, and he's really, and he actually walks through a German town and pretends to be a local pigeon. He's a really clever pigeon, right? But the story's been told in such a way that I start to believe it. Suddenly the characters in the book start believing it, right? And when the pigeon comes back to Cork, the pigeon wins this massive pigeon race. And the point is that if you can convince the city that this pigeon will win this race, because the pigeon has been shot twice, he has been hit by a bomb, he wins the race, right? And the whole north side, which is the part of the city that I'm from, right? The whole north side bet every penny they have on this pigeon to win. And of course the pigeon wins. And the whole city rejoices, the whole north side of the city rejoices, like, for weeks. There's a huge party. And so it's, if you can convince people of this. Now the fact is, here we are 100 years later, because it was First World War, and Brother Scully tells the nun, I don't think that's true. I think they switched the pigeon with a young pigeon. And it's like suddenly that belief is just taken from her, right? Because it was actually another nun in the convent cured the pigeon. So suddenly this nun, who was going to be a priest, or who was going to be a saint, the whole thing is taken from her because this Christian brother says, you can't believe that. So the story is all about the reader is constantly being asked to believe certain aspects. And if you can believe that, you're brought to the next level and the next level. And of course, then the big level is when Brother Scully decides. And what happens is he's trying to impress this young nun. He's 20, she's 20, and he's trying to impress her with how much he knows, right? And he makes the mistake of telling her this theory that he's just come up with. And it really just blows her mind, because she has just devoted her life to this whole theory, and it's like, whoa. And so that's what the whole thing is about. It's about belief, and it's not about Christian belief, it's not about religious belief, it's about all of our beliefs in everything. A belief that the sun will rise, and that's the essence of it.
So the main crux of the story in Begotten Not Made is all about Brother Scully's beliefs and how he questions those beliefs, be it religion or stories about carrier pigeons. And since you were talking about Brother Scully trying to impress Sister Claire, does Sister Claire reveal her side of the story, or do we only see the story from Brother Scully's point of view, particularly their love story?
Here's the thing. The story is this elderly brother looking back on that night that they met. So the full book is the conversation that he had with her on that night. And that's all the reader is privy to. So the reader knows that they met, because they did meet, and the reader, he or she, will know everything that was said between them, because he goes through it in minute detail, every single word that was said. And so we understand where she was back then and where he was, right? Now, she was very young, very innocent. He was very young, very innocent. And you're brought through that night, and she seems to be slightly, I suppose, more mature than he is. And there is that moment where there is that sense where she is thinking, he better ask me that question now. Will we leave the order or won't we leave? Will we leave religious life or won't we? But he won't ask, and he won't ask the question. And next thing, the night is over. They have to go home, or it only lasts for like maybe 2 hours. The whole book lasts 2 hours, right? So we're given full details of her on that night. We don't know what she's thinking now, 50 years later, right? And we don't know if she is flickering her light bulb every single morning. We don't know if she's still alive. We don't know if she left the convent. We know nothing. And he knows nothing. So that's it. So there's no secrets in this, right? He goes to find out. And then he leaves, it's night, it's dark time, and it's snowing, the wind is blowing, and he crosses the valley to the convent, and he suddenly is calling out her name. This elderly, what they believe is a demented Christian brother, is outside shouting for his Sister Claire. And that's where the story really begins, So we're given full insight into how she was back then, just as much as how he was back then, but when the end reveals itself.
So Sister Claire might just be an imagination as a result of Brother Scully's own fears and disbeliefs. The next question I wanted to ask you, Conal, is a good story always has many layers. We can compare it to an onion. So I found this another layer to the story where you included a second love story between another nun and the convent's gardener. So why did you include this second love story in the novel, Conal?
So, okay, very briefly, the conversation that night 50 years ago, the young nun tells Brother Scully, did you know that this elderly nun who cured the pigeon, very famous nun who is going to be made a saint eventually, has died? And this young nun sat with her for the nights before she died to keep her comfort, because she was sort of suffering, and this young nun was there to comfort her, right? And one night, this elderly nun woke up and she believed that Saint Joseph, that's Jesus' adopted father, came to visit her in the room. And as it turns out, it becomes obvious that it wasn't Saint Joseph. It was actually the gardener. And the gardener, this young nun, because she was curing pigeons and curing birds, she devoted her whole life to curing birds, because she cured this pigeon back in the First World War, this pigeon that won the race, right? So people started bringing animals to her to cure them. And so she was relieved of her convent duties to concentrate on curing animals. And she kept saying, look, there is nothing miraculous here. This is just me and the power of prayer. There are no miracles here. I'm just praying that your animal will get better, and sometimes it does. But so she spent a lot of time in the garden, and in the garden was a young gardener, and this young gardener was just devoted to her all his life. So she is now 70 years of age. She's very elderly, right? And so when they were young, so when Sister Clare was young, this elderly nun is 70. She has just died. She has spent her whole life in the garden with this gardener who loved her totally, right? But could never say it to her because she was a nun. So what you have two relationships. You have one relationship, Brother Scully, Sister Clare, who don't see each other, yet every single morning they flicker their light, telling each other, and the light, they can talk with the light. So flash, 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 flash. The light, they tell each other, I love you, I love you, I love you, every morning. Then you have the other love relationship, where you have the two people together all day long, every day, and they never say, I love you. And I suppose it's two different types of relationships. And except for at the very last moment, when the elderly nun is dying and all the nuns are around her bed praying, suddenly the door opens and she believes St. Joseph has come back. And it actually is the gardener. And he arrives in and he sits next to her in the bed and he asks the nuns to leave. And just before she dies, they think, they don't know, but they're outside in the hall, they're praying, and they think they hear her say, and I love you too. So basically we're told that maybe they did say they loved each other before they died. So what I wanted was two very different, unattainable loves being examined, you know, and that's what that's the essence of the book, really, right? And they're two very unbelievable stories. They're incredible stories, but so is the pigeon story, and so are the stories that Brother Scully is telling the nun in the kitchen. So while some people might believe that this is a big exploration of Christianity and all this, it's not. It's an exploration of belief. And I suppose the biggest belief of all must be love, because love is very cerebral. And people believe they're in love. It's very hard to physically say, you can't measure it. You can give diamonds, you can give flowers, you can give chocolate, but you can't measure it. It's something that's in there, and it's a belief. And I think ultimately that's why I told those two stories, because they're very specific and yet they're very opposite and similar, and also incredible. And if you can believe, and I hope that by the reading of them, the reader will believe that these are credible stories. The people say, yeah, I believe this story, right? Because they are very incredible, actually, you know. And that's why I bring in all the other unbelievable stories, because it's about testing the reader's beliefs and how far can you push something before you say, I don't believe this, as a reader, right? And that's the essence of it, actually.
So as human beings, it is a humongous task to even understand each other at a basic level. But for the concept of love to exist between two people is really a wonderful thing to see. We have two different love stories here. One seems like it has been reciprocated between two people, between the gardener and the second nun. Is the love between the Brother Scully and Sister Clare also reciprocated, or do we not know about it?
Well, what we know is that every single morning for 50 years, he flashes his light saying, I love you. And every morning for 50 years, she flashes her light saying, I love you back. That's all we know. Well, in his mind, when she flashes her light, that's what she's saying, because he hasn't met her since that first night. So he has figured out that what she's trying to tell him is this, that I love you. And at the very end of the story, that's when you realize. But I don't want to tell you the end of the story. It's the last, like the last 2 or 3 pages. It reveals everything, really. And I personally, I like love stories. I think and then it's tragic, but love is tragic as well.
That is true, and even Shakespeare dabbled with the idea of love in many of his plays,
More than that,
mostly tragic,
no,
tragic ones.
pardon.
So my next question is, uh, do you have any authors that you might have disliked at first, but sort of grew into as you kept reading them, reading their works, Conal?
No, not really. And I'll tell you why. Because I'm actually very impressed by any human endeavor. Really, like honestly, I think when I see because as humans, right, we're all humans, right? There are some people come into this world who are just so challenged, physically, for example. Like some humans will never be able to walk. Some humans will never be able to talk or see or hear. So I genuinely, and I'm not. This is not trying to evade your question, right? I'm really impressed by human endeavor. I think to see somebody cycling a bicycle is quite incredible. Not only they're cycling a bicycle, but somebody invented this thing, right, with two wheels and a chain. But on the far side of that, so it doesn't mean that I don't have a critical sense, because I do have a critical sense, right? But so, for example, here on Winthrop Street in Cork, there was a man years ago, and he had a saw, and a regular saw for cutting wood. And with this saw and a violin bow, he could make a sound. And the sound sounded sort of like, it was a musical sound, and he used to play tunes on it, right? And I used to think, this man is incredible. And I said it to my brother. I said, this guy is brilliant. We walked down Winter Street, and he would be busking, so he'd put money in his hat, and he'd keep playing. And he used to play this music to backing tracks. And that Christmas, my brother bought the CD of this man's music, and it didn't add up really, So it was just the whole visual sense of seeing this man play the saw was incredible. The CD wasn't. So I do have a critical sense, but truthfully, not enough that I feel I dislike. I actually, when it comes to the arts, I'm fairly impressed by what people do. And I mean, just even the capacity to find the time. And if anything, the more original something is, or even the more challenging something is, the less I sort of understand something. That's what I'm drawn towards. But by the same token, I also like, in the context of a painting, something that's very real as well. So I to answer your question shortly, I don't hold strong negative views about human endeavor. I really don't. I sort of go with what people are at. Yeah.
Since you don't have any authors that you initially disliked and you grew into their works, let me give you an interesting scenario where you have two people sitting across each other, and one is the person who wrote Old Man and the Sea. So you have another person is Thomas Hardy. We all know that Thomas Hardy's view of life is utterly pessimistic, and he gives you a worldview that is entirely cynical and negative. And on the other hand, you have the person who wrote Old Man and the Sea, where it is filled with so much optimism and positivity. Who do you think will win the debate between? I guess it is Ernest Hemingway who wrote Old Man and the Sea. Am I right in assuming that? Yes, I just got a nod from my moderator. Thank God I had the wherewithal to remember Ernest Hemingway's name, because I was clear about Old Man and the Sea, but I couldn't remember Ernest Hemingway, being a literature student. Okay then. So Ernest Hemingway and Thomas Hardy are sitting across each other, and you're the third person listening to their debate. Whom do you think will convince you more of a particular worldview, Conal? Is it an optimistic worldview or a pessimistic worldview? Do you think Thomas Hardy will win the debate and convince you more through his works, or is it Ernest Hemingway who would win through his?
So that's really, really difficult question. and it really is, right? I'd be quite honest with you, right? When you ask about writers I like and writers I don't like, I actually what really draws me is the style. So for me, it isn't often about getting from the front page to the last page. It's about opening and reading a few pages and saying, God, I really love the way the words go on that page. You know, I love the flow. I love that would be a big thing for me. I don't see it as being sort of as a guiding light to my interpretation of the world. You know, I see it as being sort of almost like a painting, an art style. You know, but by the same token, you asked me that question, and actually, I'll just show you. The thing is that, for example, I've been asked or invited to judge writing competitions, and I always say no, for that very simple reason, that I find it very hard to judge one over another, right? What I can do is I can pick a bunch that can say, okay, they, I believe, are of a similar standard, and other ones that maybe are just all over the place, written with crayon, or, you know, that, you know, may not be in that top bunch. But when it gets to that sort of the selection process, I find it impossible to really go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you know. But actually, something I must show you here, actually, that you might enjoy. You were talking about writing books and you know, publishing and all that. So in the process, I decided, I don't know if you can see that. I decided to do a few drawings and put drawings in the text. So this,
yeah, I can see the picture, Conal. I can see a man and a woman sitting on a bench.
That's the young brother Scully and Sister Claire, right? And I think they're the kind of choices that you can make. Oh, this is the pigeon saving the 3 boys from the north side. So that's part of the reason why I like my own publishing, because these are the choices that you can decide to put in. I could have decided not to put them in, but we talked about it and we said, yeah, we put them in. So yeah, that's off subject. But the point is that, yeah, I find it very hard to pick one over another, if that's the question you're asking me, you know, and it's a very difficult question. You know, yeah.
So since we have left the question unanswered, let us have a different type of question and answer session right now. Since you are showing me all the pictures that you have included and in your novel, do you plan on writing a graphic novel by collaborating with an artist in the future, Conal?
Not particularly, right? But I do have a Christmas story that I really like. It's an old story. I wrote it a long time ago, and it's won a few awards, and it's been adapted as a radio play, and it's a very sweet story, actually, right? And I think that story with a nice artist attached could make a lovely, like, standalone little book, you know, Christmas or whatever. But I don't have any great plan for it. It's just something in the back of my mind is festering. And those drawings, that's just purely a product of just sitting here someday and deciding I don't want to write. Maybe I draw a picture, not for any particular reason, you know. When I was drawing the pictures, I wasn't actually even drawing them with a view to putting them into. So it wasn't a case, oh, I'm going to draw these and put them in. I drew a few of them, and I selected maybe 6 or 7, and just thought they'd be nice in there. And I asked John Foley, the designer, and he thought, well, we'll see, and it fitted in with the text, and yeah. So I don't have a great plan for a graphic novel, but I can see where maybe something like a Christmas story that has really nice drawings could be very sweet, you know.
So you included your own drawings in your novels then, Conal?
Just in that one, yeah.
So do you find inspiration by mixing together different art forms in your works?
Well, I don't intend to, but for example, in one of my documentaries, I went talking to people who have carrier pigeons or homing pigeons here in Cork. And I didn't set out to be inspired. I just met these people, and I found it really inspiring. I found this is incredible. These people have, for generations, 3 or 4 generations of a family are rearing these pigeons, and so that in a way, and also that the respect that these people have. So to the untrained eye, all pigeons look the same, but when you go into the loft, you can see they're like all different, and because these people will point out why they're different and why this one is a special one and why that one is a special one. And in fact, one of the few things that I can say related to this subject is that when I stand on Patrick's Bridge, which is a big bridge here behind the house, it goes onto the main street. When I look up, there are 3 very distinct flocks of pigeons on the north side, and when I look up, I can see pigeons and I know where they come from, which is, so I know who owns what pigeons, and I like that. That will never give me a job doing anything in this world, right? But it's a lovely feeling, It's a feeling of, I suppose, what all my work is about. It's about getting to know. It's an exploration of me and my place, my neighbours, my friends. That's what I'm about. That's what the documentary's about. It's what the novels are about. It's about an exploration of history. It's about an exploration of myth. And so everything informs, you're wondering, like, do the documentaries, or does everything informs other things, and within my work, because, but I'm not going around with a notebook sort of figuring out, okay, that's interesting. It's just, I'm absorbing all the time, and then it sort of drifts out. Some things don't drift out, but thankfully some things do. And I'm intrigued by local things, actually, and by the same token, like when I was in China there, I stayed in China for maybe, I don't know, close to 3 months. I didn't really go beyond my block because I wanted to meet people in my area, the security men, the people who collect the rubbish, because otherwise I'm never going to meet everybody in Shanghai, but I will meet people in my neighborhood. And that's very important to me. I think family, connections, location, neighborhood, that's what inspires me, really. And that's what informs me in my writing, I guess,
That was a wonderful, elaborate answer, Conal. We have come to the final question of the interview. This question is something that we ask every writer who comes to our show. Since you already have this pure love for writing, do you have a favorite word in the English language, Conal?
I don't. I think every word has its own place, but what I think, and I'm sure you probably find the same thing, right? There are probably words in your locality or in your dialect that explain something perfectly well to everybody from your locality. But once you go beyond your locality, they don't know what you're talking about. And realistically, I suppose, and I'm not talking about slang, I'm not talking about slang words, I'm talking about almost like an indigenous vocabulary, right? That sort of are very succinct and explain everything to me and to everybody around me, right? So and I find that sometimes I have to resist putting that into my work because it might look contrived, But for example, like there are words, very simple words like that we would say around here, like, to da fake something would be, da fake is hard to explain. It means to da fake, look, I give it a go, right? I'll try the best I can, but it'll be all fine. Trust me, it'll be fine. So, he da fake, a da fake, or like someone, it doesn't mean somebody who is crooked. It doesn't mean somebody who isn't competent. It could be somebody who's really, so it could be a really good plasterer, for example, right? But he's given this job that doesn't really require plastering, and it's like, okay, look, I da fake. It means that with all my knowledge come together, I can make something happen here that really I haven't. And no one really is quite. So I like that one. We have another expression, Douchabai. In fact, the name of the pigeon in the book is Douchabai. And Douchabai means nothing, really, but it also means everything to somebody from Cork. It means, when you put it all together, it means I wouldn't doubt you. In other words, I trust you. And so Cork people, particularly, and probably even still, right, you would say Douchabai, which means well done, you know. So if I tell you I have good news, whatever, right, or if I say, you know, whatever, you know, and it's not big news like winning the lotto or whatever, but like small news, like, you know, I got that commission, or I got this, or I won this, or the expression back would be Douchabai. And it makes no sense to anybody else, but everybody in Cork knows exactly. So I must say I like that, but I don't use it too much in my work, because if you do, it can sound like that you're digging a hole or becoming a parody of yourself, really, right? But I like those words. They go out of fashion, but sometimes they come back in again. And that's a long answer to a short question. But so they're not English words, they're words though, and they're words that mean a lot to me, and they're words that English, in my context of my world, will fall short every time. It's a very colloquial, local word that means, and I'm sure you have something similar in Tamil, or, you know, whatever dialect that one would speak, you know.
So yeah, we do have some words in Tamil, our mother tongue, but right now nothing comes to my mind. So you are talking about Douchabai, which actually is a collective term for I don't doubt you, right, Conal?
Well, that's effectively what it means, but we don't even think that way. You don't even think I don't doubt you, right? We just say Douchabai, or Doucha girl, or Doucha, or, you know, we just say Doucha. I don't doubt you. I don't doubt you. I don't doubt you deserve it. You know, it just means all that kind of stuff. Or I never doubt your, and basically, so the reason the pigeon is called Douchabai is because he is a small egg, and it's St. Patrick's night, and the old gardener is there watching the egg, right? And the egg starts to hatch, and he's the scrawniest little pigeon ever. You can see right through him with the candlelight, but the pigeon bonds with the old man straight away because he thinks he's the mother, right? And when the pigeon chirps, the only thing the old man can say is Douchabai, you know, fair dues to you. I wouldn't doubt you. And that's how he became known as Douchabai. So those words, they, and I don't actively seek them out. It's just you hear them around as well. It's and I think they're important because they're colloquial and they carry a meaning that really is difficult to fully explain, you know, but is totally understood by everybody around.
So while you were giving us an explanation for the word, which is your favorite word, I was reminded of this particular phrase in Tamil. Okay. It goes like this, Arvadu Sinam. It actually means, Sinam is a Tamil word which means anger. Arvadu means it can be related to something that gives you a healing effect. So any anger that you feel inside you heals in time or with time. So anger can be overwhelming sometimes for a person, particularly a young people and we are given that we are in a very sensitive situation right now all over the world because of this pandemic. Any anger that you feel will gradually subside with time. So we can always overcome this particular stage in our life by healing ourselves. So Arvadu Sinam is my favorite phrase in Tamil.
And is it said almost like one word? It's just all pushed together?
No, two words grouped together, usually giving this meaning that I feel meaningful, Conal.
Yeah. Oh, very good.
You can say my favorite phrase in Tamil language.
I'll have to remember it.
Thank you for patiently answering all the questions for the interview, Conal. Now it's time for you to give us a live reading session. The title of the show, as you may know, is The Writer's Preview. So, Conal, I ask you to give us a preview by reading from, what are you going to be reading from, Conal? Is it Passion Play or Begotten Not Made?
I'm actually prepared for this, right? Because Passion Play, the end of the book, so I'm just going to read the last paragraph, right? The last paragraph is his vision of heaven. And because you're from India, you don't know what he's looking at, but it just so happens that I have a painting of this vision, right? So if you go up the street from my house, there's a hill, Patrick's Hill. Up there, there's a sloping field, and you look across the valley to the north side. And on the north side, you have the North Monastery, where I went to school. You have St. Vincent's, the nuns' convent. You have the North Cathedral. We have Shandon. You have Easton's Hill, my first school. You have Redemption Road, and it goes right across the city. And this is his view. This is Pluto's view of heaven, right? He doesn't realize it's heaven. He just says, my God, I never saw it this way before. But this is what it looks like. It's a painting painted by Joseph Keyes. I don't know, can you see it?
Yeah, I can see it. Is it from the perspective of your window, Conal, or is it something?
That's from where Pluto is standing. He looks across. So if you go up the hill here, next to my house, and you look across, this is what you'll see at sunset.
So you're standing on the road and looking at the sunset then? Well,
it's a field. At the top of the hill, there's a field. It's a sloping field called Bell's Field. And if you stand there, you can look across the valley to these houses. And that's Shandon, North Cathedral. This is Bell's Field. And so that's his view of heaven. And now I'll read his view of heaven. It's very short.
Go ahead, Conal.
Your great patience. Thank you very much. I'll give it a shot. Oh, Lord. Okay. So he has just met the woman of his love, of his life. He's had a chaotic day of tripping and all kinds of madness happening. And suddenly peace comes to his life. He meets this woman he loves and they spend a day together, the most amazing day. And suddenly this is where he is. And it's been a very traumatic day. His whole life's been very traumatic. And it's finally, he's coming into a peaceful place. So this is it. I take Yvette by the hand, and on we make our way to the brow of Patrick's Hill. There we stop, look back down into the goldfish bowl. We don't turn to salt. Yvette tugs my hand and leads the way. We climb the wall at Bell's Field. There before us is a world framed by a salt and pepper sellers, the belfries of St. Anne's and the North Cathedral. My eyes embrace the beautiful north side, laid out before us like a kitchen table at Christmas time, cram-packed with dainties and delights, stretching as far as the eye can see, vanishing over the hill at Blarney Street and Knocknaheeny. Breathe it in, I say. We walk through the knee-high meadow, nestled down into a sheltered hollow. We're sprawled there, barefoot on a grassy ridge above the city, saying nothing. Bolts of pleasure and pain as my memories travel across Brewery Valley, stopping off along the way at the North Monastery, Easton's Hill, Murphy's Stack, landlocked Powell-Raddy Harbour, past each laneway, step and steeple, from the Bishop's Palace right over to the dome of City Hall, then all the way back to Redemption Road and over the city to the spiked towers of Holy Trinity, St. Finbarr's and the green tops of St. Francis. In the distance, the county hall scrapes clouds, picking up the gold of a dying sun. I gaze out westward, out along the beautiful Lee Valley to the Carrigrahan Strait. There like a last grasp at life, a setting sun sends flames of red and orange and yellow licking high up into the sky. It looks like Ballincollig's burning. My city is a royal town, dressed up in crimsons and gold. In the distance, through the mist of time and coal smoke, I hear the cry of an echo boy, the sound of men walking and whistling their way home from work to the red city of Granabraher, the chimes of an ice cream van across on Spangle Hill, the bells of some cathedral or other, the yelps of children from Roach's buildings playing ball along the road. And as I say goodbye to this city of pain, it occurs to me that there is a harmony of movement and colour and sound. Everything is as one. The aromatic blending of Murphy's Brewery, Linehan's Sweet Factory, Donnelly's Bakery. Yvette snuggles into me. This could be heaven, I whisper. Could be, she smiles. Could be. That's it.
That was a wonderful reading session, Conal. We are always fascinated when the author reads from their own work. This seems to be a collective experience between brother Scully and sister Claire. And you gave a very beautiful description of Cork City. So anyone who is interested in knowing the landscape and the nature in Ireland, I always welcome you to read Conal Creedon's novels, particularly this novel that he just read from. The time has come for us to say goodbye to you, Conal, and before you leave, I request you to request you to answer some of the questions that we have from for our YouTube audience. Shall we take questions from our YouTube audience, Conal?
Absolutely. Am I in trouble?
No. I think our audience have many questions for you. This question comes from Jnana Selvi Conal, and she asks, what was the hardest scene to write in Passion Play? You can take it as a chapter that had some importance related to the story. You can also take it that way.
Yeah, but you know, I tell you the truth, right? I actually love writing, but it's all very difficult. Like it's a very difficult process, because once you think you have it written, that's when you don't have it written, right? So, like when I was younger, a long time ago, once it looked like a book, I assumed I had a book. But in fact, no, that's when you must really go back, and the writing begins after it's sort of written, right? That's where you start layering stuff. And so to say it's hard or the most difficult is hard to say. It's the most challenging. There are one or two very sad aspects. I find a lot of it is semi-autobiographical. The story of the woman who took her own life at the very beginning. That was a story of a neighbour of ours that we used to call an aunt, but she wasn't an aunt. And I remember as a child being told that, you know, a lot of different reasons why she went to the river. But it took a long time before I realised she actually took her own life. And I remember her body was found, as in the story, stuck downriver on the cross struttings of the wood. And one of the elderly people, I was only a child, said, I suppose because suicide was had such bad connotations then, right? Particularly then, it was considered a mortal sin in Christianity. And an elderly person said it looked like she was trying to climb out. In other words, that she wasn't trying to kill herself. It was trying to offer redemption. And I found that so tragic. So I found a lot of sadness. There's a lot of sadness in it, right? But what amazes me is people keep telling me how funny it is, right? And I'm just thinking, are you sick or what? That's a really sad book. The man is dead, you know? People. It's great.
So when you go on, Conal.
The tragic bits, sometimes genuinely, I find myself emotionally moved, even when I'm writing my own stuff. Similarly, in Begotten Not Made, when the elderly man walks into the room, I don't know he's going to do it. I'm writing this, and I'm just thinking, this is so sad. This is so sad, right? And the nuns part like the Red Sea, you know, when Moses was leading the Israelites to the promise, and suddenly this elderly man is standing there, and he walks in, and it's like, what's going to happen next? I just found it, and then the fact that they hear her say, and I love you too, and they dive into his arms after. I just found that
it cracks me up every time, you know. So if that means it's difficult, that's difficult. But I don't know it's difficult to write it. It's emotionally challenging for me, you know, some of those things, yeah.
It is emotionally challenging for a writer, and you were saying that when a character feels sad or happy, it kind of affects you. Do you also feel the same emotions as your characters when you're writing them, or are you able to keep a safe distance from feeling what they're feeling, Conal?
No, I actually be chuckling away to myself, right? Like, you know, so there's a character here now in this book who he keeps taking stuff out of skips and bringing it back to his house. So you can't get into his house. It's all stuff that people thrown out, right? And it's not his house. He's renting a room there, right? The guy downstairs can't get out the door because there's so much junk in the hall. So he has to get in and out the window. And it's that whole thing of he brings his bicycle in and out the window of the house all the time. And that sense of the guards, the police are called because they see this man coming out the window of a house with a bicycle, right? And yet, if he was, the other man can bring furniture in a door, but once you're bringing a door, you're fine. If you're bringing it in a window, you're in trouble. And it's like, I just laugh every time I come to that whole thing. And I say, oh, Lord, no, I can see what's happening here, right? And the guards are, you know, yeah, so I find sometimes I just chuckle away, you know, I find funny things funny, you know, absolutely. And I still, even though I wrote it a long time ago, I still find it funny, you know.
Good to know that you're able to divulge in that sense of mind when you're writing such stories and about such characters. Having that state of mind does really help for a writer, I guess. So the next question comes from Darren Burks, and his question goes like this. He just gave his question seems to be an open-ended question. Would you have ended the book differently? Let us say that he's talking about passion play.
I could have, but I didn't, you know. That's the point, and that's the magic of writing. There's a creative thing that goes on, and that's what I say about once it goes between the book cover, it's a byproduct. That's finished, you know. But and the same with Begotten Not Made. I think there's a lovely ending in Begotten Not Made. It's a challenging ending. It's a very challenging ending, right? But there's something very sort of magical about it. It's like it's not happening, but it is happening. And I could write 2 or 3 different endings, but that's the one at that time, having processed and processed and processed and processed, and then eventually making a bolt to the end of the story. That's where he found himself. He found himself there dealing with something, and this is the magic of it. So the answer is yes, I could, but no, I wouldn't. Because
so since it's after becoming published, it becomes a byproduct. I went with the idea of the questionnaire talking about passion play because in passion play you have the protagonist Pluto committing suicide even in the beginning, and it's all about him going through this spectacular mental journey or spiritual journey, you could say, where he is envisioning his own view of heaven. So that's why I went with this idea. Do you have anything more to add about Begotten Not Made and about its ending?
Not particularly, except that you, like every option is open until you decide to write those 2 words, the end. And once you write the end, well, until they go to print. Once it goes to print, you're sort of, your decision is made and you're onto something else. And the truth is, I think maybe that is just a protection mechanism in myself as well, that I don't really want to go back on that territory because I feel I want to go on with something new. And I know of a number of writers who can't finish a book, you know, and like who I meet, because I go around to writing festivals and things, and I think you have to, if like, as in people who are writing a book forever, they've never finished it, you have to finish it, or else it'll never be a book. So, and once you do it, you move on to the next one. And so that yeah, it's my own sort of self-preservation thing as well, that's it, move on, you know.
So the self-preservation instinct in you gave you this idea of preventive mechanism where you, once you're done with the book, you are done with it. You don't go back and try and change it, because once you keep doing that, you will always be changing the ending of a novel. So,
yeah, so you will never set to publish, and because like I'm slow going to publish anyway. Like as I say, Begotten and Made, I've been writing since 1999 for 21 years now, right? And the other book, Glory Be to the Father, the next one, I've been writing that for the same length of time. So I must finish it, and when the time comes, it'll happen very quickly. But otherwise, I'd end up with a drawer full of books that are never written, that aren't finished, you know. And the ending for me is always important, because that's what puts context. Because my stuff is inclined to go everywhere. I often describe it as, I don't know if you have, I'm sure you have, we have window boxes here because we don't have gardens, right? So we put plants into a window box. And what I think is that once you put in the main ones, right, whatever it is, we would say geraniums, right? That's my basic story, right? And then I just keep putting stuff in on top of it, and top of it, and top of it, and layering and layering and layering. And then there comes a point where I must finish. And that's where the end comes in, you know. So yeah, it could be different, but that's the one I picked.
Thank you, Conal. Next question comes from I think most of the comments seem to be celebrating your talk with us, because they seem to have learned a lot from your writing journey. And when you were talking about your impressions about writing Passion Play and Begotten Not Made, they were thoroughly impressed by your writing journey. So my question will be the final question for this YouTube audience questionnaire. My question goes like this. Since you have been talking about your writing projects and how long you take to finish them, your future projects, will they also have the same amount of, will they also take the same amount of time, or do you plan on coming out with stories much faster in the future, Conal?
Let's see, the next novel, that has been in process for 20 years as well. It's all part of this project. For example, right, in Passion Play, there's a very small character who leaves the Christian Brothers and has a gay relationship and then marries a woman. You're not told that, right? But in Begotten Not Made, there is a Christian brother who leaves the Christian Brothers because he has a gay relationship within the Christian Brothers. It's insinuated he has, you don't know, right? But if you check out, you realize that this brother has the same surname as the man in this's father. So you realize that's the same character, right? In the next book, Glory Be to the Father, and I don't draw the link between them, but in the next book, the father character is actually the gardener in this one. So there'll be no mention of this book, but it's a story about a man, and the man happens to be the gardener in this book, but there'll be no reference to it. So it's all a body of work that's ongoing, you know, and there will be a novel probably next year, but there's still 20 years of work in the novel after that. So I'm continually writing and then putting stuff together, and I can put stuff together very quickly because the body of the work is done. So I'm pulling from literally thousands of pages of text that I'm writing all the time. I love writing. I just love it. So I'm continually adding. It's too big and too chaotic to make a novel of because it's all over the place. But I can sit down and pull out. I say, okay, I pick out. So and there's also a story of a Chinese Chinese man who comes to Cork. And I don't know if that's even worthy of a novel of its own, because it's an interesting story. So I may pull that out as a separate novel. So it may seem like a long time, but it actually isn't, because it's ongoing. You know, it's ongoing all the time, and yeah, and it just allows me to keep adding on to what I'm writing. And eventually I want to go back and process what I have and make that book, and that'll happen.
Thank you for your wonderful answers, Conal. It's a privilege interviewing you and listening to you and see how you work with your literary texts. So now, before you leave, you can say your goodbye to the YouTube audience. The stage is yours, Conal.
I will. I'll just say, first of all, thank you very much for taking the time to sit and listen. That means an awful lot to me, because truthfully, I think writers, artists, anybody, sports people, people who do what they want to do, whatever it is, even business people, people who want to work in a factory and just want to do this. If you're doing what you want to do, it's a very self-indulgent thing to do, right? And it makes it very special when third parties, such as the people in the YouTube audience and yourself, endorse the fact that I'm being and just say, it's okay to be self-indulgent, Conal, keep going, man, we're all behind you. That's really very special place to be. And for people to actually choose to tune in and listen to me talk about my work. You know, right now at the moment, there are people facing into heart surgeries. There's some doctor maybe going to do a surgery on someone's eye, right? Now, that's important. You know, what I'm doing is very self-indulgent. So it means a lot to me. And I say thank you very much. I also to yourself and Chassis. And I know that your name is Kastik.
Karthik, you're right, Conal.
But Kastik is your surname.
We don't have a first name and a second name. I mean, first name and last name. So my full name is Karthikeyan, but people call me Karthik.
Oh, okay. That's why I didn't want to call you Kastik, because I assumed that was your surname. I assumed, and it'd be like me, you know, calling you by a surname, which is something you don't do here. It's a bit sort of rude or whatever to say, hey, Creedon, how's it? Not between this, but so okay, Kastik. Okay, so I knew that was your name, but I assumed that it was your surname. Okay, and so I'd like to thank you very much for, first of all, your patience, because I wasn't the easiest person to deal with. I'm a bit disorganized, basically, right? And also Chassis, who also instigated this meeting, your colleague. Chassis is right, isn't it?
One of our team members' name is Dr. Sashi Kala. You can call her Sashi.
Sashi, yeah, Sashi. She was the person who instigated all this, and that was very very fruitful. And I really enjoyed our conversation. And hopefully we'll have a similar conversation at a future date, and we might even get to Ireland sometime. We'll see. It'd be great.
Thank you, Conal. I had a great time listening to you. It was not my patience. It's just that your engrossing way of talking had me rooted to my seat. Thank you. And I hope we can meet each other again on another episode where you come and talk about your future projects, Conal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, yeah.
Now the time has come for me to talk about an interesting quotation from literature. I quote, "In the old age, black was not counted fair, or if it were, it bore not beauty's name. But now is black beauty's successive heir, and beauty slandered with a bastard shame. For since each hand hath put on nature's power, fairing the foul with art's false borrowed face, sweet beauty hath no name, no holy bower, but is profaned, if not lives in disgrace. Therefore my mistress's eyes are raven black, her eyes so suited, and they mourners seem at such who, not born fair, no beauty lack, slandering creation with a false esteem. Yet so they mourn becoming of their woe, that every tongue says beauty should look so." I unquote. That was me attempting to read Sonnet 127 by Shakespeare. I hope I did a good enough job for you to get a clear picture of what he was saying in this sonnet. Let me give a critical analysis of this. Elizabethan society did not approve of black skin as something beautiful. When you compare this to Indian society, what we have in India is not much different from the standards of beauty set by the Elizabethans. So we have cosmetics that encourage women to hate their natural appearance, to abhor their natural appearance. What Shakespeare says in this sonnet holds true even today. So to conclude, the role of cosmetics is to enhance a person's natural appearance. But what seems to be happening right now is that these very cosmetics are setting a false standard for how a woman should look. We have come to the end of this episode. This is Karthik saying goodbye. See you on the next episode of The Writer's Preview.
Thank you, Karthik. Bye-bye.